Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Jewish Professionals Podcast, the JP Podcast. I'm Hillel Bainach.
And I'm Benjamin Winters, and we're students at Yeshiva University, just looking for some advice.
Our aim is to bring to you Jewish professionals from every industry to learn from their successes and failures, how they grew in their career and Jewish identity, and made a Kiddush Hashem along the way.
We hope you can apply what you learned through the lessons to your own life as they pass the torch to us, the next generation. We can't wait to go along this journey with you. This is the Jewish Professionals Podcast.
Woo! Welcome, everybody. Welcome back to the JP Podcast, the Jewish Professionals Podcast. Ben, one might say it's big time.
Okay. I said it was big time the first episode. I was a little nervous. I was getting excited. You don't know how many times I've heard from other people who just came up to me this week. They're like, this is big time.
Yeah, because it is big time. And, you know, this episode might be even just as big time here with Brad Tatz. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for coming in.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm not sure I'm going to live up to the same hype as the dean, but hopefully we can have some good conversations here.
Yeah, exactly.
Brad, you went to the University of Michigan. You were then in investment banking at Credit Suisse, and now you're currently at Sageview Capital, Sageview private equity, the firm. Could you tell us a little bit about your upbringing, your journey, where you grew up, and yeah?
Yeah, definitely happy to. So I'm from the New York area, Westchester, Scarsdale, New York. Grew up there my whole life. Went to the University of Michigan, like you said. I think a lot of different things kind of led me to banking. Youngest of four kids. My parents immigrated here in the 90s from South Africa. My dad was in the financial services industry. My mom was before she had kids. All my siblings are quite a bit older than me because my parents immigrated here. And, there was a kind of gap between my parents having them and me. And so by the time I was, going to college, graduating high school, my brother had done 2 years of banking. My sister was working in wealth management. My other sister has worked in, a few different roles at a few different financial services companies. And so
it's a lot of finance.
Yeah, exactly. It's a lot of finance. And being the youngest, I initially thought I wanted to do something a little different, but in the end, I ended up just coming back
to oxygen
to what everybody had done.
Right. Finance is the way to be. And we got to mention the great relative of Rabbi Akiva Tatz.
My dad and Rabbi Akiva Tatz are first cousins, so that's a big part of the Tatz family Jewish lore, I suppose.
Right. Well, what's that word in Judaism? The yichus.
Yichus. Yeah. Exactly. Good lineage.
It's a new word for you, Brad. Yichus.
There we go. I'll add it to the lexicon.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, was there anything growing up around finance that drew you into there, from the start that you thought was interesting?
Yeah, I mean, it's just a super dynamic industry, right? I think it's exciting. You grew up around it. My dad, when I was growing up, was in equity sales. And so a big part of what he used to do, or still does today, is, going out on the road and helping market sell IPOs, sell ideas on different stocks the business that he works for is pitching. And you see that in action, and you see, people that are just meeting and enjoying discussing the financial services industry. And it's kind of one of those, like jokes that people talk about, which is like finance guys just like out at a bar, like out at a game talking about the industry. But I really grew up going to, Yankees games and Giants games with my dad and a couple of his clients, and just seeing them interact and seeing how much passion they had for the thing that they were doing outside of, the actual working hours. And it's hard to not get excited by, being around that, I suppose.
Right. That's really cool. Just that's what people are looking for in a job, just the passion, I feel like.
Yeah, and also kind of just how laid back networking is in finance, how it's like building real personal connections.
Yeah, I'd say that's easily the most important part at the end of the day, right?
The most important?
Yeah, building the personal connections. I mean, there's every part of the finance world at its core is selling, right? It's about being able to make personal connections with people and develop those connections into whatever the next step is, depending on what you go into, right? So, I know a big part of this podcast, or a lot of the people at Yeshiva like to, try to go into investment banking. Obviously, as a analyst or first few years in the job, you're not really making those connections necessarily with clients. But at the end of the day, the managing directors, the directors, the VPs, their whole job is selling to the client, right? And so maybe you're not doing that firsthand, but all the work that you're doing is going into being a salesperson. And so the whole industry really revolves around just like making these connections, being personable, and really being able to drive that type of value by, numbers are numbers at the end of the day. How do you get the person to want to work with you?
Right. I mean, I guess they can say that quote that you hear a lot in like high school, like just be yourself, literally is driving, I guess, the biggest financial companies in the world. Just being authentic, interacting at a real personal level.
Yeah, there's something we always talk about in, when we're interviewing kids, or used to, I guess, when I was at Credit Suisse a little bit more, which is the airport test, right?
Mm-hmm.
You do a lot of travel for work. The question that I think ends up getting asked some of the time is, okay, between these candidates, would you want to be stuck at the airport with them if your plane was delayed for a few hours?
Right.
Would you be able to just have a conversation about, both work and things outside of work, and really have like a rapport with that person? And I think it's really important to just be authentic, be yourself, and let that play out. Both for that reason, and because if you have to change who you are in a job interview, or you have to change what you're acting like and who you have to be, then at the end of the day, you're probably not going to have that good of an experience working there. And as a junior person, like, what's more important than getting along well with the people you're working with?
Right. Yeah. So before we get to the work aspect, I guess, to do the hobbies aspect and the personality, I know you're a big basketball guy.
Yep.
Yeah. That's the best thing for the airport test, I was going to say. You just always hawk basketball if you're a basketball fan.
Well, I mean, I'd be remiss not to mention that we have a member of the Yeshiva basketball team here, and a big congratulations for winning the Skyline Championship and going to the national tournament.
Yeah, I mean, I had a great view of that shot yesterday.
Brad, I got to ask you, as a basketball guy, what's going through your head when you see that shot going up?
I mean, listen, he's hit 1 billion of them this year, right? Like, he's so good. Zevy's been incredible. Max has been incredible. Or's been incredible for the last 2 years, right? Yeah. So I think it's you believe that the shot's going to go in every single time one of the three of them shoot. I think so.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, Zevy Samit, I mean, some people are calling him God these days. I don't know, but he goes down with 15 seconds on the shot on the clock, down 2 points, decides to shoot a fadeaway step back three, smothered with defense, and knocks it in.
For those sports guys out there, it kind of reminded me of that Minnesota Miracle. When Diggs catches it on the sideline, and you're like, "What?" Like, oh, and then he runs all the way in the end zone. You're like, "Get out of bounds!" And then you see him in the end zone. And you're like, literally,
oh my God, yep.
Yeah, how did that happen?
I mean, he's one of the best shot makers I think I've watched play at really any level. So
really,
some of the stuff that he does, especially these last 2 games of the Skyline Conference Championship, he was throwing some things up that not a lot of people at any level are going to make. And
high praise from a University of Michigan alumni.
I mean, listen, you gotta, if you know ball, you gotta give the kid a little bit of props. He's
game respects game over here.
That's right. And so just getting back into the IB a little bit, I think something a lot of our listeners want to know is breaking into IB. Just that networking, getting the interview is obviously difficult from non-target schools, and then once you have the interview, succeeding. What advice can you give to those kids?
Yeah, I think there's a few really important things. The first one, obviously, being yourself, just being natural. That's really important. I think a big issue that people run into when they're interviewing is they get on the phone with somebody that's a first-year analyst or a second-year analyst, and they act super formal. Like they're acting like they're on the phone with an MD or a partner somewhere. And that's just not really the relationship that those people are looking for a lot of the time. Obviously, they're looking for professionalism. They want you to be respectful, polite, professional. But at the end of the day, they're looking for somebody that appreciates that the working relationship that you're going to have with each other is peer-to-peer, realistically. There's obviously some training, but you guys are, 2, 3, maybe 4 years apart maximum. So I think acting like that is something really important. The second part that I'll say is, and this is one of my favorite pieces of advice to give people that are trying to break in, is a lot of it's about making the connectivity, right? It's about somebody wanting to pull your resume out of the stack of resumes. All these banks are getting hundreds, thousands of resumes every single year. So a big part of that is getting in front of people that work at that firm, right? Hoping that some conversation you have stands out, sticks out enough that they want to pull your resume up to the top of the pile. For that, I kind of have this, thing that I tell people, which is take a no worse off mentality with your networking. And what that means is if you think sending somebody this email is going to make you worse off for whatever reason, maybe don't send it. But the reality is, it's like, what's the worst case scenario? I send, so-and-so an email and say, hey, are you willing to hop on the phone? And they ignore you. And then you're in the same position you were in before, right? Nothing has changed. All that happened is you took 5-10 minutes to write an email, but it's not like, you're any worse off from before. And so I think just being really, really persistent, it just shows that you really care. And it shows that you have actually a lot of the skills that you need in order to break into this industry and be successful.
Right. I mean, it goes back to basketball, I guess. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting. As someone who's went through that process, I think you're often nervous that you're going to, say the wrong thing or make an embarrassment of yourself. But you're right. At the end of the day, you didn't know them before, and then you won't know them after. So your life doesn't change at all. So,
yeah. I mean, if they don't respond to the email, they don't respond to the email. You're not going to be able to make a mistake, right? So most of the time, if you get them on the phone, the conversation is going to be good enough that, at least you get something out of it. You learn something out of it. But if you don't get them on the phone, you're never going to know.
So a tip I've heard from people who have been through the networking process a lot of times is get the other person to just talk about themselves. When you hear that, what do you think of? Like, what is that really a valuable connection? And can you tell when someone is literally just peppering you with questions and trying to just go full on Sherlock Holmes on you?
It's Sherlock Holmes. I like that.
No, it's a good question. I think the reality is everyone at their core likes to talk about themselves.
Right.
That being said, I think it goes back to the airport test question, which is this needs to be it needs to be a conversation and a experience that both people take like positives away from. So you want to ask them questions, you want them to ask you questions back. The number one thing to kind of lead this into more of like the interview side, I think in an interview, and this goes back to remembering that the person is a couple years older than you, is, make it conversational. Every single one of these experiences should be conversational. You should feel like, oh, if I don't know the answer to this question, there's kind of 3 options, right? It's like, I make something up. That's terrible. Don't do that. Don't make up an answer. It's saying I don't know, which is not great, but not as bad as making something up. And then there's the third option, which I think is super valuable, which is saying, listen, I know these couple components of the answer. I don't know everything. So I'm going to make this conversational and say, okay, well, I know that, this times this is whatever, but I don't really know where that's going to take me. How would you think about that? Right? So instead of just giving up or instead of making something up, you're turning it into a conversation where you're giving them the opportunity to teach you. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, as a, analyst or a summer analyst, all you want is to have an opportunity to be taught. So that really allows, it shows that you're willing to be taught and that you're willing to admit when you're wrong or when you don't know, which is way better than the other 2 options. Obviously, first prize is knowing the answer to the question, but
right.
Yeah,
that's I think that's the best way to go about that component of an interview.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm interested in hearing is we know you over here at Yeshiva as kind of a finesse artist, Brad, the finesse artist. Do you have any stories where you kind of finessed your way into an opportunity?
I think you really always need to finesse your way into different opportunities, especially, I work in like the venture growth world now. A large part of that is finesse, right? It's finding a way to get in front of entrepreneurs, founders, CEOs of businesses that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. The reality is that the best businesses tend to need the most finesse to get in front of the founder. I would say my personal favorite story was I was on a plane going down to a bachelor party at the Waste Management, and I was sitting in the row in front of a sales rep for a software business. Overhear him talking about the fact
by accident.
Completely.
Right.
But I was going to a bachelor party. I was sitting next to a buddy of mine. He was sitting in the row behind me, just talking to somebody, telling them that he was going to SKO, which is the sales kickoff.
Okay.
And I'm listening. I turn around. I go, "What software do you sell?" He said, "I sell gym management software." And I said, "No way. Do you work for X company?" And he said, "How'd you know that?" I told him that I'd been emailing his CEO for months and that I hadn't heard back from him. And then I actually offered to make a couple customer introductions for him while we were sitting on the tarmac, and did that. Ended up, fast forward a couple of days. It's the Sunday of this bachelor party, and I get an email from the CEO inviting me to their suite at the Waste Management.
Holy cow.
to come and hang out with the team. They had like their whole sales team, their whole executive team there, and I ended up spending like, I don't know, 4.5 hours at the Waste Management with the CEO and his co-founders and the whole sales team. And like, I mean, it's a double finesse moment, right? You're sitting there. I was on the 17th fairway at the Waste Management, which is an awesome hole of an awesome course, and got to spend 4 hours with somebody that I had been spending probably about a year trying to get in front of. That just so happens I'm on the plane.
Literally the airport test.
Yeah,
Literally the airport
That's
test.
good. Can't get better than that. So what's your strategy once you're there? You're sitting with all these potential clients. How do you bring it home, make the layup?
Yeah, I mean, you really just have to drive value for people once you're in front of them. I think the two really important things are appreciating what you know and really appreciating what you don't know and trying to provide the value where you can, right? You don't want to be telling this entrepreneur who's been doing this for 5, 10, 15 years a bunch of things about his business that he knows better than you, right? There's certain things where you know that you can provide value, right? So for me in this moment, I knew that I knew potential customers for him and that we could talk about that. I knew that we had certain individuals in our network that could be really helpful for the next stages of his business. But the most important thing when you're around these people that are smarter than you, is just sitting there and listening a little bit. And it's counterintuitive to, everybody wants to talk about themselves, but sometimes you just have to let the other person talk, listen to what's really important to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Take that down. And then once you hear something where you know that you can actually add value, once you know that you can actually do something to help them, that's kind of when you jump in and you can really provide that super valuable piece of information that, only took you one sentence instead of just talking over them the whole time.
Right. It's all about, like you said, just driving value, being personal, and like you mentioned, just asking the questions. That takes a lot of courage to show the person that you don't know, and just having them sort of provide that for you. Could you take us back to, before we continue with Sageview, back to Credit Suisse?
Yep.
And investment banking in general gets this rep of being very fast paced. Hours are very long. It's for very ambitious people. Did you know that going in? And sort of how did you deal with it? And
yeah, I'm taking notes. I need to know for this summer.
Yeah, exactly.
What were the highs and lows? Could you take us through that?
Yeah. So, I mean, from the jump, my internship at Credit Suisse was during the pandemic. So we were the class of interns that did the whole summer from home. And so that was a, shell shock experience, right? I'm in my childhood bedroom working this banking internship, working, pretty long hours, just trying to obviously do whatever you can to get a return offer.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mentioned my dad does equities. He actually does European equities. And so there were some nights where I was, finishing up for the night as he was getting up to start his day because he works, 5 a.m. onwards. And so that was obviously a shell shock. I think when you're an intern, obviously you're trying really hard to like work the hours and put in the work to show that you're trying. The, real hard work and, really getting down to business happens when you return as a full-time analyst and you kind of get 6 months under your belt and you really know what you're doing or know more what you're doing at that point. I don't think there's much that can prepare you for it at the end of the day. Being ready, being attentive, listening. Obviously, all of those things are really important. But in terms of like getting ready to work 18-hour days, there's not a lot that does it. I think, honestly, being a college athlete, you see it at a lot of these banks. There's a lot of them. There's a certain part of it where it's just, being committed, knowing that you kind of just have to do the work until the work's done. That, makes college athletes pretty valuable at a lot of banks. But I can't tell you that there's, one tip or trick to get yourself ready to hit the desk.
Is it actually consistently 18-hour days, would you say?
No, I think absolutely not. The reality is that there's like definitely some inefficiencies in the way that the industry works where, you send something up the chain and then it goes up the chain and then it goes up the chain and you're kind of sitting there waiting for commentary. And you're waiting for, the MD or the director or whoever to send you comments on your work. And so there could be windows where you're not doing a whole lot. And then, clock strikes 9 and you get 2, 3, 4 hours of work to do. And, it's super collaborative and you're never doing it alone. You're in the trenches with, the trenches. I know that's become like a popular, like Hardo meme, but you are, you're deep in it with somebody else. I think the longest stretch that I had was I was working with an associate, and we were at the office together for like a week straight, kind of 8 a.m. to 4 a.m.
Would you even go home? You're sleeping at the desk.
You're going back home, kind of showering, taking a nap, and then heading back to the office.
Wow.
The reality is like good works kind of stops getting produced at a certain point, right? You're so tired that you get back in at 8 a.m. the next day, and you're kind of like fixing some of the stuff that you had done wrong. But I mean, I have a great relationship with that guy. We were in it together for for a week or 2 weeks, and he saved me quite a few times, and I hope that I was at least relatively helpful for him.
That's pretty interesting. I mean, you guys knew every single thing about each other at that point. No better than you're gonna know your wife one day.
Could you maybe unravel a classic stereotype of banking, investment banking in particular, that maybe a lot of people have, like a preconceived notion that might not be true, or maybe something that is not known as well about banking?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish I had prepared for that, honestly. I mean, I think a lot of the stereotypes are pretty like wild, right? You see stuff with liquidity and Instagram.
Wall Street Oasis.
Yeah, Wall Street Oasis.
Right.
I think a lot of stuff gets taken to the extreme sometimes. I would say I was really lucky. My group at CS was a really, really great group. I ended up living with somebody in my analyst class for a year. Spend a lot of time, outside of work with the guys that I got to work with. And so I think that was really lucky and something that probably made our group at CS unique. But, I think that there's a lot of stereotypes that like people are super, mean and like aggressive towards analysts, or there's like, certain stigmas against people that are starting where they're roughing out the whole model or like deleting the drive, all those things that people post. And I mean, I don't know if that happens other places, but it was never something that I really experienced where somebody was like, so terrible that they deleted an entire model. Like that just seems like something that's hard to do in this day and age.
Right. Well, so you were at Credit Suisse, and obviously Credit Suisse no longer exists.
Yeah. The bank formerly known as Credit Suisse.
Formerly known, right. Merged into UBS.
Yep.
So were you there at that time?
So I left a little bit early in my from my analyst program. I was supposed to do 2 years. I ended up leaving after about 18 months. So I left in January of 2023 to go join Sageview. It kind of got to the point where I think it was, if you were reading the things in the press, it was starting to get a little obvious that things weren't going so great at CS. And I was super fortunate that I had gotten the job offer at Sageview, and that I could go to them and start a little bit earlier than I was supposed to. And I, obviously I'm very grateful that I got to miss out on the, the merger and the integration into UBS, because I think that's obviously a very stressful thing to have to go through.
Wait, to full disclosure, I'm the only person on the podcast that is not in investment banking. So how does this work? Another investment bank does the merger of two investment banks?
Yeah, it's actually very interesting because I was in the financial institutions group. Our group had a silo of it that was working on all of the strategic initiatives for what was going to happen with Credit Suisse, and they were sworn to silence, of course.
That's what you wanted to get at. You didn't want to be up till 5 a.m. anymore. You were, I'm getting out, jumping out the burning building.
Yeah, so I think CS advised CS on the transaction.
Okay.
We also brought in another investment bank, if I remember correctly, to help with making sure that everything was happening the right way. But yeah, I mean, it all happened pretty quickly. If you kind of remember, if you guys were following it, it was 2 days before CS ended up getting acquired by UBS. It kind of hit the news that it was going to happen, and everything moved pretty quickly once that happened.
Right.
Yeah. So something I want to get into is, this is even relevant for people still in college, because the private equity recruitment timeline is almost ridiculous. You start even interviewing before you start your full-time job in some cases. So can you just tell us about that process and advice you can give?
Yeah, I'd say my class was unlucky for the sense that we did our remote internships, but actually lucky because our on-cycle recruiting, so to speak, only started in March of our first year. So we had a little bit of time under our belts, and we got to learn a little bit. since then it's kind of pushed back up and pushed back forward, where people are now hitting the desk and almost immediately starting to get hit up by headhunters, which is pretty insane. I mean, I couldn't imagine knowing exactly what I wanted to do in 2 years' time when I haven't worked on a single transaction yet or done a single thing yet. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of just the way the world works. I think you're seeing more and more private equity firms start to recruit less on cycle. And I think, and this is more in like the growth venture world that I'm speaking to, because it's kind of more what I know. So I think you're seeing less on-cycle recruiting from those groups, like the smaller firms, the Sageview type firms that are 20, 25 investors. And then you're also seeing a lot more of them actually recruit analysts directly out of college. So I know at Sageview we have a analyst class now that we bring in, and we have some really, really awesome analysts that drive and provide a lot of value. And
Good to know.
Yeah, exactly. No,
get him a job. Get him a job.
I mean, I would go to Credit Suisse, but it's not around anymore.
We can do the interview right now if we need it.
No, it's really great. I mean, it's super helpful. Obviously, having more people on the junior team allows you to just do more. And so we have a great analyst program. I know a lot of our peers also have really, really awesome analyst programs. And so the kind of direct pipeline where it's like, I'm going to go to banking and then immediately do this on-cycle thing. And then, there's all the stereotypes that people get their like on-cycle job and then just stop trying.
Right.
That, I think, ecosystem is slowly moving away from that being the actual standard and towards being, more for like a subset of people.
Yeah. Right. And in terms, just for somebody thinking in college, what do I want to do? And they're considering investment banking, high finance, what appeal would you make? What are the advantages of doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I gave this a lot of thought. I recruited for a lot of things when I was in college, and I don't think I necessarily knew exactly what I wanted to do when I grew up. You know what I mean? Like, right. I don't think anybody in college
astronaut.
Does. Yeah. But the reality is that one of the best things about banking is that it gives you an opportunity to take a little bit of time to figure out what it is that you want to do next, right? So it sounds kind of funny that that's one of the benefits of it, but because it's such a good environment to learn in, and because you learn so much about so many different things and there's so much technical training, you really leave a lot of doors open for yourself. And I think that's something that, is honestly invaluable about the experience. You can go into you can go from banking to consulting to real estate. You can go into venture. You can go into a whole bunch of different things. And I think you see it firsthand, and you'll see it firsthand as you kind of move through your experience in banking, is you see a lot of the people that you work with go in all kinds of different directions, go work at startups, go, do corporate finance somewhere. And so that's a really awesome thing that it provides, just the optionality of what to do next, because you learn so much from so many people that are, smarter than you, which is the best thing you can do early in your career.
Right. And like build you connections across every industry and across platforms. You mentioned how the recruitment, at least standard, is kind of shifting to less, like when you're on your job right now, if I'm understanding correctly, they're already recruiting you for your next job. Mm-hmm. Being that you went through that model, how do you stay focused in the present? A lot of times that's an issue. I think even for college kids are thinking about their job. And then when they think about their first job, they're thinking about their second job, thinking about their graduate program. And people then get in this sort of rat race mode. I'm thinking about the next, I'm thinking about the next, I'm thinking about the next. I'm never thinking about the present. How do you sort of lock in and stay focused on the task at hand and be present and satisfied with the task at hand?
It's a really, really good question. And the reality is it's a balancing act like everything else. I think at a certain point you have to be really content and really happy with where you're at. Kind of take a step back and realize all the positive things that you have in your career. In that moment, it's such a quick, instance where all of a sudden all these firms are interviewing so many different people that it doesn't necessarily last that long, which is the positive thing about like the on-cycle recruitment when you're in banking. But I think what's more important is if you're not one of those people that's going into, that on-cycle and you're trying to figure out what you want to do and kind of doing it on your own schedule, is being, focused on figuring out what you want to do. And then when you find the right thing, really attacking that. People in banking tend to be pretty good about helping out if you're going to be interviewing elsewhere. They appreciate that not everybody's staying to be an associate. And so people will pick up the slack for you as long as, you pick up the slack for them at the end of the day. And I think that's a big part of the model in general. One of the questions you asked earlier was about, how you avoid, or maybe one of the questions that you had mentioned before we hopped on was how you avoid burnout.
Right.
And I think one of the best things for avoiding burnout is cultivating and developing those relationships with the people you're working with, as an analyst, working with your associates and saying, hey, I'm going to go grab dinner with my girlfriend tonight. Like, is there any way that if I'm out from 8 to 9 or 8 to 9:30 or 8 to 10 that you can, handle whatever comes in? Then when they ask you for the same, you do the same thing. It just lets you have those moments where they can be hard to come by if you don't have a team that is really willing to work with you like that.
That kind of leads me into what I wanted to ask about is about balancing everything. Your personal life, your family life, wherever you may be in your progression there. How do you best do that when you have such pressing competitive deadlines? You have also, people that you need to maintain relationships with.
Yeah, it's hard. It's really important to be intentional with the time that you do have off from work. And I think that's the case regardless of whether you're doing banking or you're doing anything else. Is like, be super intentional with your time. The further out of school you get, the more you realize that it gets harder and harder to keep up all your relationships with all the people in your life. And, it's something that's really important, right? You spend your whole life cultivating and developing these relationships with people. And it's easy to get into this rut of go to work, come home, make dinner, go to sleep, same old. And then you hang out with the same people on like a Saturday or Sunday. I would say that just taking a step back and really appreciating that, okay, I have this 25 hours that I can do something. And, it goes back to Shabbat, right? Like, you have 25 hours where you can just spend that time with your family. And that's something that's actually really unique about the Jewish religion that kind of allows for that. And so just setting those barriers and setting up that, I am going to spend that time with, whether it's my family or my friends or whoever I spend it with, or spend the time at shul, that's, something that I think is really important to make sure that you put that barrier up.
Right. Transitioning, as you hit on, to Shabbat and more of the interacting with your colleagues in the workforce as a Jewish professional, what has that been like recently? And then also, how has that sparked, or maybe other people have reacted negatively to you and your Judaism? What would you say to speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the world of finance, and on last week's episode, you guys talked about this as well. A lot of big companies have a lot of Jewish folks at them, so it's definitely made it, especially in New York, having been in and around New York Jews for all of my life, except for a few years at school. A lot of the workforce and a lot of the people I interact with are Jewish, right? I mean, I don't personally keep Shabbat, right? So I don't have the instance where I have to tell my team, on Saturday for 25 hours, or from Friday night to Saturday night for 25 hours, I can't do work, or, what have you. But I think it's an important thing to do, and it's an important boundary to set. And I have friends that have and still do that. I think in terms of the question that you asked, and probably the more important question in terms of being a Jew in the workplace today, over the last 2 years with everything that's been going on, there's definitely some components that are challenging, right? Like, you don't want to get political in the workplace. That's something that, that's a boundary that should also be set. But at the same time, it's something that is, really prevalent in all of our lives. I mean, I have a grandfather that lives in Israel, that lives on a kibbutz like 5 kilometers from the Gaza border, right?
Where does he live?
He lives in Urim. And so it was something that when it happened, it's unavoidable to come up in conversation, right? It's part of your life. It's something that's important in your life. I'd say I'm lucky at Sageview. Our junior team, we have 7 of us that sit out in a bullpen, and 6 of the 7 of us are Jewish. And so we have a nice community and a nice environment where it's a lot of people that are going through the same experience. What's interesting is none of the senior team at Sageview is Jewish, right? So there's like an interesting...
like that dynamic.
There's an interesting split, but honestly, I think everyone has spent a lot of their careers around Jewish people because that's how a lot of the financial services industry is, and there's been overwhelming support from our colleagues just generally about any of this. Our co-founder Scott Stewart is on the board of Dartmouth, right? So he's had to experience all of this from the
Right.
perspective of the boardroom of an Ivy League university, and I mean, from my perspective, that's been the Ivy that's handled all of this the best throughout all of this. And
I was going to say, I haven't heard of Dartmouth in the news once, so I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah,
they've
it is a
done
good thing.
they've done the best job, I think, from an outsider's perspective, and I credit him a lot and the rest of the board at Dartmouth a lot for that. And I think a lot of the way that they've responded to this is also shown through in the way that like our firm has responded to it, which has been overwhelming support for the Jewish community at Sageview.
Yeah, that's awesome. And another, super important Jewish value is the idea of milus chasadim, which is like acts of kindness, doing volunteering, and helping out your community in any way. I know you do a lot of that, Brad. Can you maybe pick something that you do that's especially important to you and talk about why it's important and also how it helps you maintain your values while working in such competitive environments?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. I mean, as you know, as a fellow, basketball, person in the basketball community, I spend a lot of time coaching, helping out with, both players in Westchester and underprivileged players, just kind of around the New York area. And so I've spent a lot of time, coaching basketball, helping out, working with different charities in and around that ecosystem. From the time, honestly, I was pretty young. I mean, I used to work with Backyard Sports Cares, which is a organization in Westchester that coaches a whole bunch of different sports, for a lot of developmentally delayed children at that time that I was working with. And just, building on the combination between sports and giving back, I think is a really good way to bring communities together around a cause. At Michigan, I ran Go Blue Wear Pink, which is a breast cancer awareness foundation. And we, it being Michigan, we centered everything around the football season. Obviously, Breast Cancer Awareness Month is October.
Mm-hmm.
My dad's late sister passed away from breast cancer. So obviously it was a cause that I cared a lot about and meant a lot to me. And so we built really that whole charity around raising money through kind of the football season and around football for breast cancer awareness and breast cancer research. And I mean, I'm pretty proud to say that I think every year that I was involved in the club, which was all 4 years at Michigan, we raised $50,000+ a year. And I think that really shows how a community can rally around a cause when you bring together, numerous different parts of the community, which is really unique and really special.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Is that club still going? Like,
yeah, club's still around to this day. I wasn't part of the group that started it. I thankfully was not part of the group that resulted in it ending, and it's still going strong. I think probably about. I think I was in it for year 10, so it must be near year 15 or 16 or so now.
That's why I wore pink today. I know.
That's amazing.
I wore blue. There we go.
We're Matt. We'll take a picture after. Well, also kind of on that idea of doing things outside of your job, kind of more in a business sense. How do you keep your ambitions going? Kind of try to be entrepreneurial while you also are stuck. You're working extremely long hours. How do you keep that creative side going and have side projects maybe?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's part of that balancing act at the end of the day, right? You just have to choose how you prioritize things in your life. You can't do, 100 hours a week of everything that you want to do in your life. It's unfortunately not possible. I wish there were more hours in the day, then we could all, spend a lot more time doing a lot more things. So I think it's important to just pick and choose really, how much you want to lean in or lean out from doing something. I've spent a lot of time, as you know, coaching basketball, as I mentioned. A lot of time during the AAU season, obviously coached with and coached Max, and, spent a bunch of time doing all of that. And it's something that I really care about and I really value. And so I make time for it and I make time to help out and make time to coach because it's something that I really love and I really enjoy. I have other friends who do, a number of different things with that free time, whether it's going skiing on Saturdays on the weekend, because generally you have Saturday off, or, a number of different things. It's all about making priorities and making decisions.
Yeah. And one more thing in terms of private equity. I don't know if we ever explained really what private equity is for our listeners who don't know. Can you maybe talk to us about what private equity is and maybe the most interesting transaction that you've been a part of?
So what private equity is, and just to clarify, I work in a subset of private equity that isn't necessarily like standard private equity. So I work in growth equity, which is really a in between private equity and venture capital. And so to give the high level, I suppose, on what all three of those are, private equity is, generally speaking, buying majority or total positions in private businesses using a combination of debt and equity. The best way that I think like the 400 question guide puts it is it likens it to buying a house, right? It's similar to getting a mortgage. You have a little bit of equity in it. You have a lot of debt on it. You service that debt over time. In the instance of private equity, you obviously hope the asset appreciates as well. You put in new operators and try to build that business. Venture capital on the other side, I think more people are probably more familiar with that in today's day and age. And, that's investing in, private new kind of startup companies that are really fast growing, really exciting, kind of on the cutting edge of technology or whatever they're in. Growth equity sits in the middle of that, where we're investing, at least in Sageview's instance, we're investing minority positions in businesses that are private, fast-growing companies, but have kind of de-risked a little bit. So they have product market fit, they have customers, they have exciting growth still, but they've grown into more of a real operating business that doesn't necessarily need as much to get from point A to point B as something maybe in venture capital does. It's obviously a oversimplification. I could probably go for like 2 hours on that, but I think it's really exciting. I mean, the people that I get to talk to every single day are like the smartest, most passionate people about what they do in the entire world. They've built awesome businesses. They've grown them. They have, really, they have all the keys that they need to get to the next step. And they've built something that's a prevailing business, most of the time. And it's really, really exciting to get to just, listen to and talk to really smart people. I think if I was going to leave either one of you guys with one thing that I think is the most important piece of being, a young professional in finance, is surround yourself with really smart people, or find your way to get in front of really smart people and just sit and listen to them. Because, thus far in my career, albeit short career, the best things that I've done has just been sitting and listening to people that are a whole lot smarter than I am. And there's a whole lot of them. So, that's the best way you can learn anything.
Right. And a question you kind of hit on that we like to ask all our guests is, what's a skill or through an experience, something that you've learned that's specific to your industry? And you can pick either banking or the PE and the private and the
Growth
more
equity.
subset growth equity. There we go. I'm getting more of the finance now than doing. And the growth equity.
We're getting you ready
sector,
for the interview.
that you think applies to every other industry.
Yeah, I mean, I've hit on it, I think, a couple times, but it's the soft skills at the end of the day. I think the technical side in a lot of aspects is kind of table stakes. You either can do it or you can't. You learn it or you don't, right? Like, you can build the model or you can't build the model at the end of the day. And I think in growth equity and in a lot of other things, it just comes down to, can I build a relationship with these people? Everything at the end of the day is selling. Every single job at the end of the day is selling in some capacity, whether you're selling to other people or you're selling to people internally or, whatever it may be. It always comes down to trying to get people to trust that whatever you're trying to tell them is the right thing to do or the right investment to make. And so if you can develop that and cultivate that relationship with the people that you're working with and working for, and you can build trust, that's, to me, the most important thing. And a lot of that comes with listening first. So,
Got it. Before we let you go, is there maybe one final message as both a Jew and a professional that you want to leave college students with, leave us with, that you think is important? Takeaway.
Yeah, it's make that time for the things that are important to you. I think for me, as probably a more secular, less observant Jew than the two of you guys are. My favorite part of the Jewish religion, I think, a lot of my peers that are Jewish that I grew up with would say the same thing, is that it, as a religion, really drives really strong family values, right? The most important thing in Judaism, at least from everything that I know and that I appreciate, is what a great job it does bringing people together, right? Bringing your family together for the holidays, just sitting around a table, enjoying good food, and just, spending time with each other. And so always continue to make time for those things, whatever, those things are for you, whether you're Jewish or not Jewish, or whether you celebrate, the different holidays with your family or with your friends. Make the time, make sure that you're spending time with them, and, just get to enjoy the time that you're outside of the office, because you're going to be in the office for a really long time. You're going to be in the office for 40 years. So you have to build that work-life balance in some capacity.
Okay. Bradley Tatz, everybody.
The amazing, incredible. Appreciate you for coming.
The finesse, as you called him. The finesse.
The finesse artist.
The finesse.
Maybe that'll be the title.
Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Make sure to like and subscribe. This was the Jewish Professionals Podcast. Looking forward to seeing you guys in the next one.